What's up, Whisper Nation? Apologize for being a couple minutes late. We were about to jump on, and I noticed I didn't have my Kyler Murray jersey on. Can't do that when you're talking the NFC West. We're breaking down every single team in this division, including my Arizona Cardinals, those Los Angeles Rams, the Seattle Seahawks, and what's going on with Russell Wilson, as well as those San Francisco 49ers, or San Francisco 40-winers, as I like to say. All that right here on the Fantasy Whispers.
Right here.
What's up, Whisper Nation? Johnny told you we're going NFC West today. That means we're breaking down those four teams. But we want to say, if you're seeing us right now, if you're hearing our beautiful voices, go ahead and hit us with a like, a subscribe, and follow us on any platform you're on. And you want to do us a big favor, share this bad boy, because that helps with the algorithms as we grow the channel. If you're brand new to the Fantasy Whispers, follow us on all social media platforms. And you can find all those links at thefantasywhispers.com or just by searching the Fantasy Whispers on whatever platform you are on. We put out fantasy football content daily, Monday through Friday. And when the regular season starts, it's pretty much 7 days a week, 24/7. We get no sleep. We're hashtag team no sleep around here. If you guys want to support the show in other ways, you can head on over to patreon.com/the Fantasy Whispers. But again, go to thefantasywhispers.com. You can get all the goodies over there, including the draft kit on pre-sale. Johnny, we are talking the NFC West today. You got to be pumped for this show. Your Arizona Cardinals living right here firmly in the NFC West.
Oh yeah, I cannot wait. I was really excited to get to this division, Travis, and the fact that it's like the last division too in our division breakdown series.
Right.
That's exciting. We get to start moving on to some greener pastures, talking a little bit more exciting, gems and things like that. So we got some exciting shows ahead.
And this is kind of the process for us, right? We get to kind of have a frame of reference when we go through the division. We touch every single fantasy relevant player, so it sets our perspective for you, Whisper Nation. And then when we come away from these shows, we got a better knowledge of every single player for this year. Their 2021 outlook helps us write the draft profiles that are in the draft kit over there for only $10. TFW, they're at fantasywhispers.com. But that frame of reference helps us dive deeper. As Johnny said, we'll get into our bromance shows. We'll get into our shitty committee shows. We'll get into those things that help us kind of forecast the offenses and fantasy football and help you win that championship. So let's dive into that NFC West, except for first, we got some news and notes, Johnny. So our little rundown, we're going to try the news and notes. I'm going to give you the top headlines. I want you to then pick one out for Whisper Nation that you think means the most as far as fantasy or you're most excited about. Because, we could spend all day talking news and notes, but it is a little bit of hearsay. So let's see what we got here. Number one, Trey Lance has a legitimate shot to start. This is from NBC Sports Bay Area, Matt Mayako. I hope I didn't botch that here. San Francisco's 49ers quarterback Trey Lance will given every opportunity to rise up the team's depth chart in training camp and perhaps challenge Jimmy G for the starting job. So there's some stuff to be talking about there. Jimmy G, we've heard that they probably want to have him sit behind, but we'll see how that goes. In Jacksonville, there's growth at wide receiver for Laviska Shenault, and that is going to be a focal point, according to the Jaguar report by John Shipley. Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver Laviska Shenault is unlikely to be used as much on running plays in 2021. And based on the comments made by Darrell Bevell, who told reporters Tuesday that he wants Shenault to develop as a pure wide receiver this offseason. We've heard a couple rumblings about this, that they want to use him more. That's good news for Visca truthers. Number three, we got Cleveland Browns wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. back on the field. Got a little excited about that. Couldn't even finish the sentence. The source here is the Akron Beacon Journal, Nate Ulrich. Basically, OBJ was spotted at practice at mandatory minicamp for the first time Tuesday since tearing his interior ICL ligament 8 months ago. So that one's some big news. Johnny, we've got these headlines. Anything really poking out as the main piece, the main focal point for fantasy football GMs out there?
The main vein, as they say. Yeah, I would, the Trey Lance stuff is definitely interesting, but we'll talk about Trey Lance. So I don't want to put that one out there. I will say I was going to bring up the Laviska stuff because we're big advocates for Laviska, but
How can you not talk OBJ, baby?
Yeah, you got all excited about the OBJ. Yeah, so I thought we'll go down the OBJ route here. We'll talk about this for a second. Listen, I think that OBJ is very interesting because he's one of the last receivers off the board that one has proven he can be super dominant. And two, he's like one of the last few wide receiver ones coming off the board in general for teams. And so when you put those two things together, Travis, I do think that OBJ is going to be a nice piece if certain strategies. I think that grabbing OBJ could be there's really nice upside. And for what where he's going as far as ADP wise, there is a lot of upside there. And, if he doesn't hit his upside, right, Travis, you're not investing a significant ADP draft capital in him to where it'd be like, okay, this is going to sink your team now.
Yeah, there's just so much going on here, Johnny, that rings like it's such a good post-hype player to go after. Okay, last year we were talking up OBJ and the discount you could get Odell at because he was coming off a poor season with Baker. Well, guess what? This offense turned around. We had Kevin Stefanski win Coach of the Year for this team. They went out there and did what they had to do, and now we're in second year with that. Baker knows the offense a little bit better. We know OBJ is going to command upwards of 20% of the market share. On a low-volume passing attack, that's not great, but it's pretty good if you can be the number one there, and then he is such a threat down the field or whenever he gets the ball in his hand to score that the touchdown upside is tremendous in an offense that's going to be sucking or an offense that's facing a defense that's going to be sucking up for the run. So I really like what I'm seeing out of OBJ. It's good that he's healthy and back right now. It's good that this is a guy that has all the talent. So we just got to be excited about this. I think he's a great value this year as a guy that can basically, be your third, fourth wide receiver you take and then ends up being maybe your best one, depending on how it goes there.
Yep.
All right, so let's talk that NFC West. But before we do, I want to talk about the draft kit. We told you it's that time of year again, Whisper Nation. The Fantasy Whispers draft kit is launching soon, and it's going to be better than ever this year. Our draft kit is fully loaded with premium player projections and rankings, consistency charts with over 3 years worth of data, cheat sheets, strength of schedule charts, and so much more. The TFW Draft Kit will be on sale July 1st for just $15. But if you order starting now, you can get it for the rest of this month for an incredible price of $10. Head on over to thefantasywhispers.com and get your draft kit today. For those watching live, I'm about to drop that in the chat right now across all platforms. So make sure you guys go and get the draft kit today for only $10. Johnny, we're going to start with yours truly, the Arizona Cardinals. Look, when we look at this team, we know that Cliff Kingsbury might be a little bit on the hot seat this year. They have not been able to run the full air raid that we wanted. We've had some tumultuous times at running back, especially for fantasy GMs, and we've brought in some more wide receiver help. I mean, they just cannot stop drafting and bringing in wide receivers. It's definitely seems to be the wide receiver team of this division, even though you've got Seattle. But I want to talk about Kyler Murray first, Johnny. I saw an interesting tweet from Ian Hartitz over at PFF. He says most fantasy points per game in a single season from QB in NFL history, and he lists the top 5 by year. 2019 was Lamar Jackson, 2020 was Dak Prescott, 2011 was Aaron Rodgers, 2018 was Patrick Mahomes, 2010 was Mike Vick, and you see all their points per game. Lamar Jackson, best quarterback season in fantasy ever, was 27.7. But he makes an interesting note that in 2020, Johnny, Kyler Murray was on pace at 29.3 to shatter that points per game in weeks 1 through 10 before his shoulder injury. And so that's what I really want to get at. Have we even really seen Kyler Murray's ceiling yet with an offense that's been so horizontal? Because he's not only the guy who's got the Konami code with the rushing, but this guy can rope it down the field as well. So you get him the wide receiver help, and we're looking at a guy that can break fantasy football.
I definitely think he can. I mean, we saw it at the beginning of last season, right? Kyler Murray was going back and forth. It was kind of like the Rocky versus, and Rocky 1. They were just going back with Creed, back and forth with who had the QB1 overall. And then Kyler got the shoulder injury, and that kind of set him back. Here's what's interesting, Travis. You look at the weapons that they brought in, right? A lot of them are yak guys. Rondell Moore, we'll talk about him in just a second. These are guys that are going to be able to, Kyler will be able to get the ball out quickly to them and let them do the work. And you love that, from a fantasy perspective, because he's not getting injured, as well as you're getting yards, you're getting free yards. And so I think they're going to scheme. You talk about you talk about Cliff Kingsbury, and the air raid, right? Well, 2 years ago, they had the most 4 wide receiver sets of any team. And it was a significant amount. It was 30% of their snaps were in 4 wide receiver set. Now, you can imagine they're probably going to do a lot of that this year, especially with no tight end as of right now. They drafted the rookie, Rondale Moore. They've got Christian Kirk, on his last year of his deal, and then they brought in AJ Green, and it's just all spelling like he is going to have a dominant season.
Yeah, Groggy style in here saying Kyler has a very good shot at QB1 this year with all those weapons. I mean, that's the bottom line. Not only did he have it without the weapons, now we're going to add the weapons, get the weapons fully healthy potentially. And you add some red zone threats now, too, with AJ Green in there, who's able to sky the ball and get up. And then, of course, DeAndre Hopkins. And then you've got Chase Edmonds working, who we'll talk about next. Jacob Blay also in here, number 1 fan, saying chilling, that he says, "What's up, guys?" Obviously, Cat's Pajamas saying, "What's up?" Want to thank everybody in here. If you guys are watching, we got 7 of you watching on YouTube right now. Hit that like button. Let us continue to hit like on every platform you got here.
I wanted to just follow up with one other stat with Kyler, Travis. That is, he was the number 1 ranked quarterback last year in 3-step drops. Why is that significant? Well, like I said, they brought in weapons that will help get the ball out quickly. And when you're trying what does quickly mean? 3-step drop. He's already the best at it. It seems like it's all adding up to where Kyler really can make that. And you're talking about 3rd-year quarterbacks in general make a huge leap in their 3rd year. So I absolutely love Kyler Murray and his chances of being the number 1 overall quarterback this year.
Yeah, Unc Phillips watching on Periscope. Thank you, 1964. Unc Phillips, 1964 says no excuses for KM, but really no excuses for Kingsbury here. Yeah. That's who's really going to have to get it done this year, and that'll be, because they're not going to cut, Kyler Murray or anything at this point. They would move on from Cliff Kingsbury, and that's where we're going. We want to move on here to Chase Edmonds, and I think, Johnny, when I keep doing these mock drafts with Whisper Nation, which we do on Monday, I just keep asking, why is Chase not being drafted higher? We look at the advanced metrics. The guy's an electric running back. He has now basically been handed the starting job. I know James Conner's in there, and I get that. But we're talking about James Conner, who's never stayed healthy. We're talking about James Conner, who is probably just going to be a pure handcuff and a depth piece for them. The contract is not such that he's going to be, the starter. And then you have Chase Edmonds, who we know we've just been chomping at the bit to make him the starter. Why aren't we drafting him higher, Johnny? Not that I want that to be happening.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I'm sorry if I, to the people that were getting Chase Edmonds, I'm slowly trying to do my best to rise this ADP, even though, we don't want that. But I'm telling people people are just sleeping on Chase Edmonds, Travis. That's the reality of it. When people look at the situation, they are like, oh, it's Arizona. Kyler Murray will limit any of the running backs there, because he's a rushing quarterback. He had 11 rushing touchdowns last year, Travis. And I just don't understand, because it doesn't make sense to me when we always talk about Baltimore Ravens. And yet, Gus Edwards, we do think is a tremendous value, and people are majorly sleeping on him. But you got J.K. Dobbins there, who's been, hype trained this summer. He was always all the way up in the 2nd round. Now he's falling a little bit. But here's the reality of what Arizona actually does, Travis. They were 6th in rushing attempts per game in 2020. Chase, when you look at him, a lot of people aren't projecting him to be the actual starter. People think it's going to be James Conner. But you have to look at what they did. They paid James Conner a minimal contract. He was one of the last few veteran running backs to sign. Every beat reporter that I have followed and as well as on the sports radio, they have all talked about Chase Edmonds is the guy. He will get the bulk and the first crack at the majority of the carries, Travis. And when you're talking about the 1st and 2nd downs sprinkled in with the 3rd downs, he's getting that Kenyon Drake workload. Everyone thinks James Conner is going to get the Chase Edmonds, everyone thinks James Conner is going to get the Drake workload, but that's not what the reality is. They're just bringing him in for short yardage because he's a bigger back. He could see the goal line work. I'm not going to lie. He could see that, but Chase is very electric and dynamic, and they like him in the red zone with Kyler Murray. And the other thing I'll just say on it, you got to sometimes read the tea leaves, and of course I follow Kyler Murray on social media. Who wouldn't when you're a big fan of his,
Right.
And he posted on his social media a
RB1.
little bit, RB1 season for Chase, and it just tagged them together like doing a high five. I'm telling you, everyone else is off of Chase because of the James Conner. You need to strike. That's when you strike. You look at these ambiguous backfields, Whisper Nation, and you go after what the beat reporters are telling you has the best chance, and that's going to be Chase.
So with that same kind of logic, and we won't talk too much about Connor, I don't know that Connor's going to be huge, but do we actually see an opportunity where Connor could be kind of a bargain in fantasy football, because he's going right now in the 10th round as RB34. That's behind guys like Michael Carter, Trey Sermon, Fournette. I mean, I think I would obviously take all those guys ahead of Connor, but is there some value to snagging Connor if we do want to go after ambiguous backfields? Because I don't think this is really that much of an ambiguous backfield.
Yeah, I agree. And here's what I would say. And I'm going to bring this point up a lot because I've started to, as I do more and more research, and of course we play more and more, we develop different kind of strategies, and we'll give different advice on those strategies. And here's what I would say with James Conner. I won't be drafting James Conner. I'll let somebody else draft James Conner, because the only reality of James Conner having true value will be if Chase goes down. Now, that could happen because we've seen it in the past, but I think that would take a few weeks at least. It's not going to happen right away. And I would bet that the person who drafts James Conner will see in the first few weeks, hey, he's not getting used often. His upside is limited because, maybe he does get the goal line, but Kyler's pulling some of it. They have these weapons. So then they'll drop James Conner, and then that's when you go and swoop him up. You pick him up off the waiver. That would be my advice.
I love it. I love it. That's some big brain stuff there. Unc Phillips coming back saying Kyler needs to hand it off before he gets hurt. Let the RBs run.
He's a really smart running back.
Yeah, he is a guy. I mean, obviously the shoulder injury doesn't help that narrative, but he is a guy that's been, kind of successful in running when he needs to. And running only when he needs to. I think that's the point there. All right, we got to talk the wide receivers, Johnny, and I think it's good to clump all these guys together. Obviously, we know what DeAndre Hopkins is, but I've been afraid of his workload not matching what it did in Houston at times, where it was 35% of the target market share. But we did see situations last year where Kyler got him the ball in droves. Can Nuke finish as the wide receiver 1 overall, Johnny? Because that's where you're kind of trying to draft him in that second, third round as a guy who's going to hit that ceiling, and you want him to. Can he do it? Can he finish top 3 here?
This might break some people's hearts. Sure, anything is possible. Nuke could definitely finish as the wide receiver 1 because we've seen it before. However, do I think it's possible for him to do it on this team? That I don't know. I do have some doubts, and here's why. Arizona has been, top 10 in passing over the last 2 years. They ranked 9th and 7th, so you can get the passing attempts there. The target should be there. Here's where I have some concerns, Travis. In order for him to finish number 1 overall, he has to have the yardage, which he definitely has the yardage. He's done that over the last 4 years. But he has to get over 12 touchdowns. And that's the issue I think I see here is what are the odds that he's going to get 12 touchdowns when you do have a guy like AJ Green coming in, who is a dominant red zone target. You have a guy like Rondale Moore, who they'll scheme in the red zone because he's fast and electric. You've got, James Conner as well coming in. So, and then not to mention you got Kyler himself, who will pull it and go into the red zone. So, you start to look at what is the ceiling for Kyler. Can he pass 40 touchdowns? Sure, he definitely could. But then when you start breaking down how he's passing those, it becomes slimmer and slimmer. But here's the reality of why, I gave you all the negative on why I don't think he could be number 1, but I still think you should definitely draft DeAndre Hopkins. And here's why. 1, consistency. I love consistency when it comes to fantasy football. It's one of the major things that you should look for when you're looking at players is how consistent are they from year to year. And they don't really come more consistent than DeAndre Hopkins 5 out of the last 6 years, Travis, he's been wide receiver 4 or better in PPR. Right now, he's currently wide receiver 4 coming off the board. Sometimes I've seen him fall a little bit lower than that. And so I think you're basically getting at the return. So if you talk about building a roster in the first few rounds, Travis, of, hey, I just don't want to miss on these guys, I can take my gambles in the later rounds. I think Hopkins is just fine. And he does truly have that wide receiver 1 upside. I don't think he gets there.
All right. Well, we've talked about the alpha that is DeAndre Hopkins, and he will most assuredly be the alpha in this offense. But AJ Green, who no longer is the alpha for Cincinnati, has now come over. And I think it just begs the question, like, is AJ Green washed, or was he just sick of Cincinnati? Could a change of scene actually get him back to fantasy relevance this year?
I mean, this was one of the biggest, question marks last year. And we all pondered, why was it that AJ Green was not doing better? Because he was having so many targets per game. And so originally I was like, oh, maybe he is a little bit washed, right? But we have to remember he did take a year off of football, right? So getting back into that football shape might have been a little bit more difficult than he thought. And you have to realize he was also operating as the number 1 wide receiver for Cincinnati. He's not going to have to do that in Arizona. He's going to come in as the wide receiver 2 behind Hopkins. So he should see a lot more single coverage. And when he does that and pair that with, the targets that he should see, right? He saw 101 targets last year, Travis, or excuse me, 104 targets. And just under 1K unrealized air yards, which is pretty significant, right? They were pretty errant throws. Kyler's pretty accurate with the throw, especially the deep bomb. And you have to look at, where can these vacant targets come from? Do they have it in this offense? Well, they do, because Fitz, I don't believe, is coming back. We don't know. We haven't heard anything, but I believe he's not going to come back. I think we would have heard something by now. And as well as Dan Arnold is no longer on the team. They haven't picked up a significant other big tight end yet. And so that's 117 vacated targets that are leaving.
Just about what he had last year with Cincinnati. Yeah. I think that's important to talk about. And you're drafting him a whole lot lower, I believe, than you were last year on this Arizona offense, because of the too many mouths to feed narrative that goes around. So I really like AJ Green as a value pick as well. With some upside, real touchdown upside. As Johnny said, no big presence in the red zone other than Nuke, but Nuke's going to get a lot of attention, which means AJ Green is going to be a guy. AJ Green and the running backs are going to be guys that have big touchdown upside. And listen, dude, Charlie agrees with me over there. He's agreeing that that's what it's all about in the background over there. I want to talk about one more player. Yeah, Johnny, Rondell Moore, who I know Charlie and you are excited about. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time. I know this is a rookie, and we don't see a lot of rookies break out as much, but Rondell Moore is a guy that you're telling Whisper Nation to keep an eye on. Obviously, in Dynasty, you're big on him, first-round pick in Dynasty, we'd say, in rookie drafts. But how are you feeling about Rondell Moore going in, making a difference as a rookie in redraft this year?
I think that there actually is some potential here, Travis. Now, sometimes his ADP creeps up a little bit higher than I'd like to. I think it's a little bit more of a risk and gamble, because there are a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. But there is some interesting things to take note about Moore, right? He's expected to be used on jet sweeps, bubble screens, and slants to get him the ball quick and allow him to work. Like I said, yards after the carry, that's where he's good at. He does, if you are in a league, this is why I think it's a little bit more important. If you are in a league that you get some kind of kick return yards or punt return touchdowns, he will be used for that, because they want to, again, get the ball in his hands. He's electric. So he can return, maybe 1 or 2 kicks this year or 1 or 2 punts this year, and you're going to be excited about those points. Also, it's very possible Moore could finish as this team's second leading receiver. Over the last 2 years, Cliff Kingsbury has, like I said, 26% of the time he's been in 10 personnel, which is 4 wide receiver set. Buffalo ranks second, and they come in at 15%, just to give you a perspective. Like, they were running it a lot. Cincinnati and Tampa Bay, which are 2 other teams that do it the most in the league, they come in at 5% of the time of their routes or through the 4 wide receiver set. So there is going to be opportunity, especially with a speedster. Cardinals have 50% success rate on that 10 personnel. And so I think if you're looking at, Christian Kirk hasn't been the most significant bill of health, and I think that they will use more and get him plays. So he's a guy to keep an eye on, but he has that really big play upside.
Well, and that's the thing is this offense, we just have not seen the ceiling for this offense. We've seen flashes of what Kyler can do. We've seen flashes of what Nuke can do, but the full offense, remember when PFF graded Arizona as one of the better drafts they've seen a couple years ago, it was because they took all these wide receivers to run the air raid. They figured this was going to be down the field. If AJ Green can add an element, then you got Rondell Moore. We could actually see this offense produce 3 fantasy wide receivers. And that's not without the question of saying like, oh, who is going to be a Dallas Cowboys like team that we can invest a bunch of wide receiver capital in? And I think Arizona could be that team to flip the script a little bit. Let's talk about another team that's got a good offense on paper, and that's the Los Angeles Rams. Look, when we talk about what this offense or what this team has done, they've got a great defense. We know that. They have mortgaged so much of their future in a win-now mode, including what they did for Matt Stafford this offseason, probably like 17 first-round picks, and Sean McVay's first unborn child was traded for the Detroit Lions, and no, not Jared Goff. That's his first unborn child. But yeah, no, jokes aside here, Matt Stafford's coming in, Johnny, and we've got to talk about him because I just feel like maybe he's not being drafted as high as maybe his ceiling is within this offense. And on paper, Stafford will be in the best offense with the best coach he's ever had, Johnny.
Yeah, I think that some people are sleeping on Matthew Stafford this year. Listen, I get it's a new offense, and Matthew Stafford did slightly injure his thumb in OTAs. They're saying he should be fine. But here's what I do like about him going over there. And with Sean McVay, when you talk about Sean McVay and what he could do from a coaching perspective, Travis, Jared Goff was the QB6. Yeah, Jared Goff, the one that we all laugh about. We call him, what does stepmom call him? Stepmom Lauren call him? I believe he was like the vanilla
Prius.
oh yeah, that's right, an electric Prius. Well, that electric Prius was able to finish as a QB6 under Sean McVay as rookie or his first year. He threw for 4,700 yards and 32 touchdowns. Now, Travis, I don't know about you or Whisper Nation if you've looked at Matthew Stafford's stats lately, but that's basically what he rolls out of bed in a season and gets. So can he definitely finish with those stats? Absolutely. There's like no doubt in my mind he could finish there. And you're looking at, he was QB, Goff finished as a QB6 that year. Sign me up. I think he is going way too late. I think his ADP will rise as, people see him more and more in this offense and they look to see what he can do. But here's the reality too, Travis. I do see some downside, but it's okay because where he's being drafted, if you had to cut bait and jump ship and go streaming route, it would be okay. But here is something that is in the back of my mind as a concern. That LA Rams defense is really good. And so and so I could definitely see a reality like Matthew Stafford, who was doing all those, had all those stats, right, with a really bad defense. He never had a good defense. So he's always coming from behind, putting up big numbers. My concern is that if they get up big or, they get an early lead, they lean on this run game because they do have a good run game and Cam Akers and then Henderson backing him up. And so it could limit his upside. But when you look at the history of Sean McVay, right, he generally doesn't let his foot off the gas, even when he's up by a lot. So that makes me say, all right, I think I'm going to proceed. Stafford will probably be a quarterback I'm going to target in a lot of leagues. I was really close to saying he was going to be my bromance, but every time I do that, he ends up not producing. So I don't want to curse him with that.
When TFW picks him as a bromance, something happens. He either doesn't have a good year or he gets hurt. So we don't definitely want to do that this year. I will say one last thing. You talked about how this defense could limit him. I actually think that we're going to see a mystery box, so to speak, with Matt Stafford. I think he's like a Tannehill where he's going to be super efficient in this offense. And it's really not going to matter so much. He's one of the best deep ball throwers there is in the league right now. And so when you are pounding the rock with a good offense, picking an offense apart over the middle, and then you do the deep shot with Matt Stafford, that's going to be so great to have. So for me, I just feel like there's something here. Yeah, they could be lower in pass attempts because the defense is so good, but they could be so hyper efficient in this offense. There's some sort of mystery. Like Matt Stafford, dark horse MVP votes is a really good bet right now, I believe. All right, let's talk that running game, Johnny, because we're going to talk Cam Akers here, and it's going to be Cam Akers unleashed, Cam Akers season this year. And we're looking at that group of second-year backs, and I think he is definitely a guy that's probably the best bet of those second-year backs, just based on what we've seen in the Sean McVay offense. And what we have seen under Sean McVay is back-to-back RB1 overall finishes by Todd Gurley. We talked about Cam Akers last year, Johnny, and how Cam Akers was a dark horse to finish as RB1. We saw a flash of that last year when they turned to him. Is that his true ceiling, and is that why we're comfortable drafting him back end of the first, beginning of the second?
Well, and then you have Sean McVay to put more fuel on the fire, right? As if there wasn't enough. Comes out and talks about how he thinks Cam Akers could be a 3-down workhorse running back, which he did also say when they drafted him. So, that definitely it gets, Twitter hyped up. It gets everyone hyped up that Cam Akers could definitely have that potential. And, down the stretch, we definitely did see that when they leaned on him and he got the workload, he definitely produced, right, as a nice fantasy asset. But here's what I do want to mention, Travis. And I do think it's interesting. I want to get your opinion on this, as well as Whisper Nation. Let us know as well in the comments what you think of this. I'm starting to wonder and question a little bit, Travis. Is Cam Akers going to be this year's Kenyon Drake? And what I mean is, last year Kenyon Drake was coming off the last year. Well, hear me out. Last year, Kenyon Drake was selected as the RB11 coming off the board at the 203 spot. That's right around where Cam Akers is going right now. Like I said, Sean McVay calling him an every down back. We saw that they were saying that about Kenyon Drake, right? They used him down the stretch. He looked great. And you look at what Cam Akers did, right? Down the stretch, weeks 13 through 17, he did miss week 16, but he had 96 touches, 436 yards, and a touchdown. During this span, they ran the ball five more times per game on average, and threw the ball 7 fewer times per game on average. And they were also running about 9 plays fewer, Travis. There is where I get a little bit concerned. I think it's kind of funny where you see these different storylines. We saw a guy like David Montgomery, right, come in, get this massive workload, and because of certain circumstances, and explode. And people are out here saying, oh, it's fluky. He's not going to get this same workload. Well, when you look at what the LA Rams did, Travis, last year, Henderson got injured, and that's what gave, Akers that second life, right, at the end of the season. And then they really leaned on him. He got why did he produce so much? Because he was getting 25 to 30 touches per game, Travis. And I don't think with a Matthew Stafford led offense that he's going to see 25 to 30 touches per game. I think that's going to come down to maybe 16. And when you saw him get only 16 carries, Travis, and he didn't score a touchdown, he didn't score in the top 30. And so I do believe there is going to be a lot of people who are drafting Cam Akers this year who are going to have that, in their mind, I got the RB1, dark horse. And listen, he could get there. He definitely could. We've seen it in the Sean McVay offense before, but we've never seen a Sean McVay offense with a good quarterback like Matthew Stafford. And so I do think that at the end of the season, will Cam Akers be, RB12, RB13? I do believe he probably finishes right there. But I ultimately think, just like Kenyon Drake did last year, he finished right there. But people were disappointed because he didn't make that huge jump into the top 5, number 1 overall.
Yeah, this is an interesting take, except for that Jared Goff, for fantasy purposes, and in that year, had a career year under McVay. So I do think that, look, they're not as good as Stafford, nowhere near as good as Stafford, but there was great quarterback production in this offense to pair with the running back. And in fact, when that happens for the Rams, that tends to be a good thing for the run game, because then you can keep defenses honest in both facets of the game. And so I will think, yeah, maybe he doesn't get 20 to 25 touches. Maybe it's more closer to 17 to 18 or 17 to 20 touches a game, Johnny. But I think they have a room to be a very efficient offense under Stafford, making the right decisions, which would mean touchdown upside. Like that was the biggest thing for Gurley, is this offense sliced him all the way up and Gurley punched it in. And I think Akers can easily be that guy. You could easily see him increase in the pass catching because now they're going to be able to throw to the backs a whole lot more like they did in the first 2 years under McVay. So I think there's a lot of ceiling play in it for Akers. I don't mind taking him there where you're taking other guys that, have some concerns as well. But yeah, like you said, I definitely think there's a realm where this could fall flat in people's faces. And as Jacob Blay says, Darrell Henderson going to be a problem for him too. Any interest in Darrell Henderson? He's been a popular value pickup in the late rounds. Any concern in Henderson eating Akers' value here?
I do think that there is some, he will get some touches, very similar to how other third down running backs get some touches. I don't think it's going to steal a vast majority of, carries away from a guy like Cam Akers. I think they do want to use him a lot. But here's what I'll say, very similar to what I was saying earlier in the show. I would probably not draft Cam Akers. I would wait for someone to see his workload not be what it is and drop them, for another player because they need it, and then go and pick him up because he does have a lot of upside. If a guy like Cam Akers were to go down, he did see the bulk of the carries in week 16 when Henderson was not in there. They no longer have a guy like Malcolm Brown. So I do think that Henderson will absorb that kind of workload. And I do think that there is a reality where we're talking on some waiver wire show because Cam Akers is a bulldog. That's how he plays. He likes to run over players. So there is a big possibility that he does get injured. And then Henderson is the guy for a couple of games. And we've seen him come in and produce, Travis, as an RB1 when given the opportunity as well. That was the thing that kind of surprised us in the beginning of last season, right? Was how Akers started off, but Henderson looked great. And then Akers got injured. Henderson was given the bulk of the carries. And then he ended up really showing up until he got injured. And then, the rest is history. Cam Akers came in and here we are. So Travis, I do think that there is going to be definite waiver wire articles on Henderson this year. I just don't know if I'm going to waste a draft pick on him, because I don't see it panning out early in the season.
Yeah, no, and this isn't like it was last year where you might take Henderson late because you think he emerges as from an ambiguous backfield where they were using Malcolm Brown, Henderson, right, and Akers last year. This is definitely more of an Akers show with a complement of Henderson. All right, let's talk about the wide receivers here. Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp. For years, it's been this debate between the two. We think both are probably going to be within the top 15 because that's essentially what they've done for most of their careers, especially Robert Woods' consistency. Is there an untapped ceiling, though, for Robert Woods, Johnny, with Matthew Stafford coming to town? Because we've seen Woods doesn't mind getting down the field either. And Woods is a guy that's just done everything he's needed to do to be the wide receiver one for this team as far as, the X and what they need him to do in that offense.
Robert Woods continues to be one of the most disrespected wide receivers in fantasy football, Travis. He's finished top 14 each of the last 3 seasons under Sean McVay. He's a wide receiver 3 or better on 62.5% of his games. So from a consistency standpoint, you do like what you see there. There is something that is interesting to take note of when you're looking at his production. He did seem to struggle and have his down games came against top corners in the league, Travis. Now, this could be due to the fact that, Robert Woods had Jared Goff throwing him the ball, and Jared Goff didn't feel as confident throwing in those tight windows. Guy like Matthew Stafford doesn't have an issue with that. He'll sling it. I tend to believe that Robert Woods will probably be more consistent than he's ever been. And I do think that he'll still finish, top 14. And I think people continue to disrespect him in fantasy football drafts. He's one of my favorite values.
Well, somebody that's getting disrespected, Johnny, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit next week, obviously, with our wide receiver wide receivers that can win your league show that we're going to do next week. People are sleeping on Cooper Kupp, Johnny. And I think Cooper Kupp is a guy who's not only a touchdown threat, does every position he needs to do in this offense. Sean McVay loves him. There's just a lot working here in Kupp's favor. Best quarterback he's ever played with coming in with Stafford. Stafford's a guy who loves a slot receiver, when he gets a good one in Golden Tate he's had before. So, Johnny, what do you think about Cooper Kupp? How many how are people just sleeping on his absolute value? This is a guy just a couple years ago finishes a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy with Jared Goff. So I think that's within his outcome here.
A lot of people question it because Jared Goff and him had a really good touchdown connection, right, Travis. And so I think that's why people, you're looking at the last few years, 13 touchdowns versus Robert Woods 8 in that span. So some people might say, oh, I think that there could be, will Stafford favor him as much in the touchdown or in the red zone as a guy like Goff did? And I would tend to believe that they will. Cooper Kupp is not a small guy, although he looks kind of small on the field. He's 6'2", Travis, so he's pretty big in that slot. And here's what's interesting. Over the last 2 years, Cooper Kupp has only seen 10 fewer targets than Robert Woods. And he's scored 3 more touchdowns he only scored 3 touchdowns last year in the 2020 season, which was a 3.1%. So I think people are looking at that. They're seeing, Robert Woods continuously finish as, a top 14. And so that's causing people to sleep on Cooper Kupp. And actually, I agree with you. I think that Cooper Kupp is a tremendous value. He plays 55% of the slot. And the last thing I'll toss it over to you after this, Travis, was that Cooper Kupp actually ranks 3rd in yards after the catch, which is with 507. Robert Woods actually ranks 4th with 487 in yards after the catch, or as far as last year goes. So Cooper Kupp is actually a little bit, people are really sleeping on Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, Kupp's good. He's been good. He's very smart with what he does in the offense for this team. He can call out plays even to the quarterback he's done before. There's just a lot he's able to do. But then the biggest point, you talk about the 3 touchdowns. To me, when I hear that, Johnny, it feels like he's due to get back up to what he's been doing. Like positive regression is coming for Cooper Kupp here. I want to say what's up. Do It 420 says, hi, guys.
What's up, man?
And he is asking about Higbee. So that's a great transition here. Is Higbee fantasy relevant now that Everett has left the building? Johnny, this is the late round tight end to target we've been talking about on our mock drafts. Talk to the people about Tyler Higbee here.
He's one of my favorite tight ends to target later on, and I'm trying to find I'm looking for other ones because Travis has already started to snipe my tight end pick here.
Hey, every year I got to do it, Johnny. You hype up a tight end, and I got to take him, and everybody knows it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the confidence, but
I agreed to do this podcast with you so I could take all the sleepers. That was the whole idea.
Fair enough. What I will say is a lot of people might, look at this offense and say, oh, well, they have Cooper Kupp, they've got Robert Woods, and, I don't know where all these targets will go or if Matthew Stafford will favor his tight end as much as he did in Detroit because, 1, it's not TJ Hawkinson, and 2, I don't know if he's really produced a good tight end over the last few years. Well, I'm here to set the record straight, Travis, a little bit. All right. Since 2014, Matthew Stafford has gone to his tight end on average 17% of the time, as far as 17% market share for the tight end position. Over the last 4 years, though, with TJ Hawkinson, who has been, a top tight end, or at least, athleticism is up there, that target market share has jumped up to 19%. And then TJ Hawkinson last year was the tight end 5 with 101 targets for 67 receptions, 723 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Okay, that's what gave you the tight end 5. So we know that, Matthew Stafford could produce a top 5 tight end. But here's where it kind of sums it up for me and why I'm so interested in Tyler Higbee. You say, okay, 101 targets, Johnny, for the tight end position. That seems like a lot in this Rams offense with, so many mouths to feed. Well, here's what's interesting. You look at what the Rams did last year. If you take their 2 tight ends, because Everett's no longer there, right? He got shipped to Seattle. We'll talk about him a little bit later. But Higbee and Everett combined in this offense last year for 120 targets, Travis, 77 receptions for 920 yards and 7 touchdowns. That would have been the tight end 3 on the year last year. And so am I saying that Higbee is going to be a top 3 tight end. Maybe not that high because, maybe Stafford does use his wide receivers a little bit more than he did in Detroit. But I do think he has that top 5 potential for sure, top 6 potential. I think it's almost a Charles Barkley guarantee.
I think the hype here is real. And the reason I say that is people aren't buying enough of this offense in my mind. Okay. If you are going to make if you think that Matt Stafford is really good at playing quarterback, if you think that Sean McVay is really good at calling plays, you should be investing in this offense. And that means Cam Akers, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and or Tyler Higbee, and Darrell Henderson to some extent, as we talked about. So why wouldn't you take the cheapest option to invest in? And that's Tyler Higbee at this point, who's going late in drafts. And so, yeah, Johnny, is he going to finish top 3? No, we're not making that bet right now, but he could. He definitely could. It's within his range of outcomes because he could be a guy that soaks up a lot of the secondary targets. Like, who knows? Maybe people are right about Cooper Kupp, right? And Matthew Stafford comes in, loves Robert Woods, and loves Tyler Higbee. And that's the 2 he goes for, and the offense is efficient. Well, you're going to want Tyler Higbee in that case because he's going to be a top 5, top 3 tight end. I don't know if it's going to be, but I think that investing in somebody, throwing your hat in the ring on somebody in this offense is the smart thing to do. And Higbee's the cheapest one, which means the ROI on that's going to be really good. We'll move on to the San Francisco 49ers. But before we do, Whisper Nation, we just got to let you know we're nothing without your unwavering support. And we are so proud of this community we've built together. If you feel it upon your heart to help us continue to grow this family and chase this dream, consider joining us at patreon.com. You can show support at the $5 and $10 levels, and the patron benefits include access to our exclusive Discord channels, entries to sports card giveaways, increased odds for landing a spot in the 2021 Listener League, and those spots are going fast. And then we've got bonus content that's only available to our patrons as well. So head on over to patreon.com/the Fantasy Whispers and join the nation today. San Francisco 49ers, we talked about Trey Lance at the top, Johnny. Just break it down to me quickly. Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance, who's going to start? And if so, if they do move to Lance, is Lance one of those guys that, I've been thinking about taking him late in redraft leagues. It's like your last pick because the upside for Lance this year could be league winning.
It definitely is league winning, of course. I'll tell you right now that one of the most attractive things going for the San Francisco 49ers is that they do have one of the easiest fantasy schedules for quarterbacks. It's the 3rd easiest. They start off with the Lions, Eagles, and Packers. So not really terrified of any of those defenses there. And he could actually, they could have all their wide receiver weapons available, which was rare for them last year as far as the 49ers go. They were always so injured. I will also follow up with, I think that Trey Lance could definitely be league winning, Travis, because you look at the playoffs now, it's, things will change. And that's why you subscribe and hit the bell so you get notified whenever we drop new content. But
Ding.
you hang out with the Fantasy Whisperers. We'll tell you as this evolves throughout the season, we get more data. But as of right now, June 16th, on paper, San Francisco has the easiest playoff schedule according to for quarterback position. So what this offense can do. We know what it can kind of produce. We know that he can also has that, Konami code upside of scrambling because there's a lot of, rollouts in this offense, Travis. So in reality, there is a world where Trey Lance is that, rookie quarterback sensation that we always see, at least once every year. I do tend to believe, and you'll have to continue to follow this, throughout training camp, but I do think Jimmy G does start the season. And then if he does ultimately struggle or continue to struggle like he did, I do think they'll turn it over within a few weeks. I don't think it will be, 6-7 weeks into the season. I do think it'll be about 2 to 3, 3 to 4 weeks into the season.
I think their week 10 is their bye. I heard Sigmund Bloom talking on Football Guys, and he was talking about how he thinks that when they hit a rough stretch where I think they play Pittsburgh and a couple other winning teams right before their bye, he could see them turning to Trey Lance for those big games, trying to get some momentum to try and win and gain ground in the division. So I could see that scenario happening. I just would say Trey Lance is an investment for sure. You might have to burn a roster spot for the first 5 weeks, but I think that's one you burn for. And that's one I have done in the past. With Patrick Mahomes. Like Patrick Mahomes' rookie season, it was a guy you kind of picked up and you stashed, And then it paid off in big ways, as we know, because that guy was elite. I'm not saying that's what he is. He didn't have the college production Mahomes had, but the rushing upside is there. And speaking of rushing, Johnny, let's talk about the two running backs together that we're concerned with here. Obviously, Jeff Wilson got hurt. We know Eli Mitchell is a guy that people like as a late-round dart throw, but Trey Sermon's the guy they traded up for. And then you've got Raheem Mostert, who is the guy who, whenever he played last year and over the last few years, has just been a home run hitter for this offense. But you're saying, this is a contrarian take for you here, Johnny. Typically, you would say you got to invest in this offense somewhere in the running game. You're kind of fading the running backs in this offense just based on trust issues here, correct?
Yeah, Travis, I'm getting some real bad trust issues with the 49ers, and that's just what it boils down to. I'll advise people if, this offense is a good offense as far as producing running backs. When the running back that they pick to start is in, that running back does produce. Raheem Mostert was supposed to be that RB1 or a running back A on here. His draft capital is a little too high for me, Travis. You look at what he did last year, or over his career, he's been a great running back. There's no doubt about it. Averaging 5 yards per carry on average for his career. It's very impressive. But when you look at what he did last year, remember he was going that 5th and 6th round. He was only averaging about 13 carries a game, and he had a high of 17 rushing attempts in a game this past season. So when you're just looking at what you're going to be getting and what you're having to give up in order to draft a guy like Raheem Mostert and hope he is the RB1 for this team, it's just too risky for me, especially look what these guys that are going around him: Devonta Williams, Leonard Fournette, Michael Carter, Trey Sermon, who, I'll bring up here in a sec, and then Damian Harris, Travis. Like, I would rather have, arguably probably all those guys over a guy like Mostert, just because Mostert hasn't been the biggest bill of health over the last year. And we do know that this system doesn't produce healthy running backs. That's where I'll bring in the Trey Sermon talk.
I don't want to just dog on Mostert for being an undrafted free agent, but maybe that's some of what's keeping him unhealthy. He's not a pedigree guy. He's not a guy that was, I don't want to say made to play in the NFL, but like not a guy that's had to fit that bill of health. And maybe that's part of the reason why. Trey Sermon, Johnny, upright runner, guy who's ran in this scheme before, getting a lot of praise from his teammate George Kittle. They traded up for him. Jeff Wilson was a guy standing in his way kind of on the depth chart. Obviously, we've got Wayne Gallman there and some other guys that we don't really need to talk about too much. But Trey Sermon's a guy people are investing in. I invested in him in Dynasty. Do you see a redraft path this year for him to be top 15, top 20 back for people in fantasy football?
I mean, the path would be very, very slim. It would be like a curb that you'd be walking along, Travis, because you have to bank on Mostert getting injured and then Trey Sermon staying healthy the entire year, and then maybe you get that right. I just think that there are going to be so many different pieces in this offense that are just new and have to evolve, right? You're talking about a potential rookie quarterback coming in that takes away rushing upside. You also talk about, Deebo Samuel, what he tends to do in this offense. He gets a lot of bubble screens, gets a lot of usage that way. And then you also talk about, where the target market shares, like, they don't generally use their big running backs as far as in dual threat positions. Like, they don't usually throw to them and run with them. So I just think that there's so many things that are limiting what that, to get to that top 15, that I'm just going to admit that, like, hey, I could get this wrong. I'm just going to pass on it because I truly don't know where I'd want to spend because they're, Trey Sermon and Mostert are basically going about the same. And, you say you've got also Elijah Mitchell there, who people are a little bit excited about. And, like that system, like we always talk about 3 or 4 guys throughout the season for the 49ers. So that's just my issue. I have trust issues with them.
Yeah, I think there's just a situation here where there's other guys going around, but I don't know, let's just look at it here. You said Javonte Williams, Leonard Fournette, Michael Carter, Damian Harris. Other than Fournette, Johnny, maybe Chase Edmonds is going a little bit ahead of him. I don't know that he doesn't have a ceiling that's bigger than all those other guys in my mind.
Wow.
And so I just feel like this is a guy that can easily finish as an RB1 in fantasy football in that offense if things break right. You get the offensive line is getting healthier. Obviously, we know the defense is going to give them a lot of opportunities if healthy. It's a team that's been, harbored by injury the last couple of years. So you could say maybe they're due for a healthier season this year. They do face a lot of tough defenses in that division. So that's kind of not enticing. But Sermon's upside in this offense, I mean, we've said it before. Yes, over the last couple of years in San Francisco, it's been like a revolving wheel at running back. But when that guy is the guy, we see 4 touchdown games. We see home runs hit in this offense. And before a couple years ago, we were saying, look, Shanahan makes RB, top 15 RBs out of these backs. We look at Alfred Morris in the past. We look at Devonta Freeman in the past. So there is a path to really high success for Sermon. And that's why I feel it's okay to invest if you're going to call your shot. But Johnny, I get what you're saying. Maybe you're passing for a wide receiver in that round. You're not going for one of the backs here because they all scare you. That's fine. But of those backs you've listed, Sermon's ceiling in my mind is definitely higher.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, let's talk about the pass catchers for San Francisco. We obviously know that number 1 is George Kittle. Johnny, my biggest question with Kittle is I almost think he's being slept on based on where we had to take him last year. We talk about all the time post-hype. We were taking Kittle around where we were taking Kelsey last year because we thought his ceiling was up there. In fact, I thought, Kittle, based on what he could do for the offense, being the absolute alpha for the offense, no Tyreek Hill here over in San Francisco, Kittle would be the better bet because you get him later and he could spring. Now, obviously, he was not healthy. Johnny, are we sleeping on Kittle versus what we could project last year? Do we still see that within his range of outcomes?
He definitely has, top 3 in his range of outcomes at the tight end at the position. I mean, he even has tight end 1, right? You're talking about what rookie quarterbacks, if it does end up going that way, what do rookie quarterbacks tend to use the most? Well, they tend to go to the tight end position. So his position is kind of safe in that aspect. The biggest question is just his injury health. I don't always like to label, wide receivers or tight ends or players injury riddled or anything like that. I will say he's only played 16 games once in his 4-year career, but he has played 14 or more games, 3 out of 4 years, excuse me. So he is, pretty healthy. The other thing that I do like about Kittle, his career average bust rate is 31% games finished. So that's games finished outside the top 12, right, Travis? So because when you're drafting him because he should in general stay in that top 12. It's a plug and play tight end every week. You don't have to worry about it. Here's what I'll say. Shameless, putting myself under my microscope here. I was doing the show notes yesterday, and this question hung me up the most as to whether or not I would honestly draft George Kittle. I do understand his upside. I do get the fact that he will win you weeks because he's that dynamic. The reality of what Whisper Nation needs to do this year, when they're like, I can't give you a 1v1 answer. What I can do is I can't just say, yes, draft Kittle, or no, don't draft Kittle. What I would say is play within your strengths as a fantasy player. If you like to stream positions, I would advise go the Higbee route and we'll be able to continue, because the reality is, Travis, when I did a deep dive, the reality is 46% of the time, a top 5 tight end comes from a waiver wire tight end. So you have, and when you're, then, like I said, you were looking at George Kittle at 73% of the time, just being a top 12, not a top 5. That dwindles way down. So if you are the type of player that, you like being a little bit more hands-on with your lineup, you like listening and tuning into us every week, and we can give you that streaming tight end. If you like playing that way, then I would advise, go with the route of either another dominant wide receiver, grab, another running back to stack your running backs there early on, because he's going in those first 3 rounds. But if you don't like to play like that, because you can find running backs on the waiver wire as well, then grab a guy like Kittle, because he's going to be consistent. You don't have to worry about that spot, and then you save yourself that worry. But you have to ask yourself, ultimately, I hate to side swipe this question on you, Travis, but ultimately I do believe Whisper Nation has to determine what type of fantasy player they want to play, or what style they want to play this year.
I think the answer is fade Kittle based on what you're saying for a guy like Darren Waller instead. Like if
Yeah.
you're going to go second round tight end, you're not going to take Kelsey. You're going to take a running back, and then you're going to come around and get your tight end, later, or it's your third spot, whatever. Take Waller because Waller is actually the guy who's better bet to stay the main vein of his offense, unlike Kittle, who has now Ayuk and Samuel, who we're going to talk about next, and then the quarterback concerns. Right, we could go from Jimmy G to Trey Lance. What would that
Yeah.
mean? Obviously, we've seen Kittle survive pretty much any quarterback, but I think it's still something that needs to be brought up when evaluating between the two. You have Derek Carr, third year here now with Gruden. You have him peppering Darren Waller. That's his guy. You have Darren Waller being as durable as they come at tight end, and you might as well just take Darren Waller if you're going to. I think it's Kelsey only for me, and then getting all the other positions and punting till the end. But I think Waller is the better bet in my mind. All right, let's move on to the wide receivers here because the big question, Johnny, is going to be Ayuk or Deebo Samuel. So break them both down for me because I need to know, like Ayuk or Samuel, the one to own, or could we potentially get both here? I did a little breakdown for the article I'm going to put out here in about a week or so for the second-year wide receivers. And what I saw was, yes, Deebo Samuel used a whole lot more, but used more as that yak guy that they, bubble screen, the guy that they do the little, jet sweeps or whatever. They get the ball in his hands. But Ayuk's advanced metrics blew Samuel's out of the water. He was definitely the more effective guy. But I think, PPR, maybe you want Deebo for targets. Standard, you want Ayuk for upside. What say you, Johnny? How do you feel about the two wide receivers here?
Yeah, I think this might surprise some people with Whisper Nation because if they've been following along on our mock drafts, I've been saying I've been a fan of Deebo and grabbing Deebo a little bit later than Ayuk or grabbing whichever wide receiver kind of fell to me. And I actually have, after diving into this a little bit more, Travis, I actually have changed my opinion on it. I have come around. I am just solely on the Ayuk bandwagon here because of the fact that you do look at, like you said, Deebo does get actually, when you look at it, he does get out or out targets Ayuk, but it's very, very small margin. I'm talking 31-30 in 5 games they played together in 2020. So very slim. But what I do like about Ayuk over Deebo is the fact that Ayuk had a slightly more receiving yards per game. And here's the big one, Travis. He had 6 red zone targets compared to Deebo's 2. So they're definitely using him more in the red zone area. And why not? Ayuk's a big wide receiver. He also has more upside to me because with Deebo in the lineup, he's had 2 top 20 finishes. And then when you look at with Deebo out of the lineup, because Deebo is kind of an injury risk, 4 top 12 finishes without Deebo. So the upside to a wide receiver path is definitely there, and it's less risky, in my opinion, to go with Ayuk over a guy like Deebo, who his best finish with Ayuk was wide receiver 14. And the one game he played with Ayuk, he did finish as the wide receiver 7. But when you look at, what he did in 2019 without Ayuk, he had 5 top 20 finishes. So he's much more of a wide receiver 2. So my stance on this is very similar to some of these other players that I brought up, Travis, and that is that go after Ayuk. If Ayuk gets taken, then I would actually not draft Deebo. I would wait for somebody to drop Deebo a couple weeks into the season because he's not going to get a big plethora of targets. He's not going to get a lot of red zone targets. And then I would wait for that person to drop him, and then I would pick him up. Because if anything were to happen to Ayuk, he does have a wide receiver 2 path, with some wide receiver 1 upside weeks. But I only think that happens as long if Ayuk gets injured, and I don't think that will happen. So I would go with Ayuk.
All right, we got to move on to our last team here, Johnny. That's the Seattle Seahawks, and we're going to talk Russell Wilson. Will Seattle allow and will they throw enough? And at the end of this year, will they end the year correctly to justify the mid-round selection of Russell Wilson? We've seen it in his career. He's been up and down either at the beginning or the end. There's always some sort of lull for Russell Wilson. It either is the beginning of the year or it's the end of the year now that we've seen. Do we see that happening, or do we see him start to finish QB1 overall? Can we see what we saw as his MVP case last year was starting?
Travis, I'm not going to be drafting Russell Wilson. That might shock some people this year. I understand what his upside is, but like you said, Russell Wilson, when you look at his week to week averages over years, you start to form a picture, right? You see a guy that is truly a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of player. And I don't like drafting those types of players. You look at, you talked about it, Travis, last 2 seasons, Russell Wilson's weekly average for the first week, for the first 8 games, was QB7. Then you look at his weekly average finish from the second eight weeks of the season, QB 17. That's a huge drop off. And then you look at up through week 9, his lowest finish on a week was QB 10. Well, he only finished as a QB 10 one time after week 8 last year, Travis. So that's, very, very concerning to me when you're trying to, be consistent as possible from a position you're drafting relatively high, right? Let's be real. But like you said, too, he doesn't just do this in the beginning to the end of the season. He did that over the last 2 seasons. If you look at the season before, it was reverse. He started off ice cold, and then halfway through the season, he picked it up and finished the season on a tear. Here's the one difference on why I'm not drafting a guy like Russell Wilson this year, Travis, and that is because I believe it's going to be similar to his 2018 season, where he starts off really ice cold, and people are going to panic because this is his opening schedule: Colts, Titans, Vikings, 49ers, Rams, Steelers, Saints. That is brutal when you're talking about the defenses that he will face. Can he get it done? Absolutely. It's Russell Wilson. But in the same token, I don't see that happening with the fact that they want to reel this back. They want to get back to running the ball more. Yes, Russell Wilson could be a little bit more efficient, but are we really going to bank on that as we get older? Chris Carson's a little older. I hate relying on that aspect of it. You know what I'm saying? So I rather have somebody else.
I think Russell Wilson, perfect best ball quarterback. Russell Wilson to pair with a DK Metcalf, perfect best ball stack. But in redraft, you'd be forced to kind of pair him with a guy who could be more consistent, so you could try and pick matchups. Obviously, you have the 2 Rams matchups where he just does not play very well against them. Arizona even kind of limiting him a little bit last year. So that's a situation where Russell Wilson could be, Johnny, it's a hot take as a do not draft for a guy who was starting to set the league on fire last year. And with the talent that he's got around him, but I do like the consistency being an issue for you. And look, we saw it in our league of record last year. Russell Wilson put Tucker, our friend Tucker, in the forefront of running the league out and maybe winning another championship. However, at the end of the year, he cost him a championship because that's what I think was in his range of outcomes. You just don't know what you're going to get sometimes, and he could fall off a cliff here, whether it be from play calling, whether it be from his own production, throwing interceptions, or line issues. It's all happened to Wilson before and could easily happen again.
And to that point, Travis, you don't ever want to try. That's the dilemma you end up, putting yourself in is how do I ever bench Russell Wilson? Well, don't put him on your team in the first place, and then you don't have that. And then if someone drops him and you pick him up, then you can kind of face that dilemma if it ends up getting there. But yeah, I totally agree with you. Great point.
All right, let's move on to Chris Carson, Johnny, because he continues to be the constant quiet winner in this offense consistently. Carson set to continue to prove doubters wrong. How do we feel about CC coming into this year, Johnny?
So I'm going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly with Chris Carson here, Travis, and Whisper Nation can kind of decide for themselves. I'll give you what I ultimately think, and then it'd be interesting to see what you think, Travis, because I know you are a big Chris Carson fan as well. Here's what's nice about him. 11th easiest projected schedule for running backs. His worst finish in the last 3 years was last year when he was a RB19 in PPR. Again, he only played 12 games. The other nice thing is Rashad Penny is already missing practice again for another knee cleanup.
Your boy.
So there's really no competition for him. He also did seem to get the fumbling issue under control, and he had 1 last year after having 7 the previous year, and everyone worrying about it. He was a 9 weeks out of the 12 he played last year, Travis. He was an RB30 or better. I like all of that stuff. Those are all great notes on Chris Carson. Those are all positives. But here comes the bad, Travis. And I apologize for those truthers of Chris Carson. But here's the reality. He's never played a full season. Last year he saw the fewest carries that he's ever seen in his career with 147 carries. Well, other than his rookie career, of course, or rookie year, of course. He only saw 53% snap share and a 58% opportunity share, Travis. That was down from 71% in 2019. And they didn't have a lot of competition last year. They had Carlos Hyde. Sure, Carlos Hyde's no longer there. But here is the cold hard truth on Chris Carson. What you need to know when you're drafting Chris Carson, if you draft Chris Carson. Chris Carson is, no doubt about it, he is touchdown dependent. You look at what he has done throughout his entire career. He has averaged out to be the RB32 when he does not score a touchdown. But when he does score a touchdown, he's averaged out to be the RB10 in games where he scored a touchdown. Now, here's the other solid truth about it, and the honest opinion. He has scored 14 touchdowns in the last 27 games, Travis, so about 50%. That's pretty impressive. We talked about how we could see them going back to a little bit more heavier workload as far as running the ball a little bit more. If you go in and you come and you find that you're getting some values, early, some wide receivers that fell that you didn't expect, or maybe, like a Darren Waller falls to the 4th round and you just can't skip it. I think Chris Carson ends up being a guy that you say, I'm going to take the good with the bad. And look, when he plays, he's most likely going to be good if they, as long as he scores a touchdown. I know I've got an RB1. If he doesn't score a touchdown, then, hey, look, at least he's not killing my team, because he's most likely going to be a top 30. But just know he's probably going to miss time, because that's the type of runner he is. And there will be weeks where he does disappoint, where he doesn't get in the end zone. He only gets you, 50 yards, and you're going to be a little bit disappointed. But like I said, for the value you're getting at, with some of the other guys, like he's going Melvin Gordon and like the Trey Sermons and things like that, Travis, I'm like, yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, he's a guy that, is going to, like you said, he's going to be that touchdown dependent guy. But I don't mind that on a Russell Wilson-led offense, because you're going to get down the field. You're going to get opportunities. More times than not, we talked about it in those 27 games, he's scoring 14 touchdowns. He's going to get a touchdown, and we can bank on that kind of efficiency, like in Aaron Jones with Green Bay, with Aaron Rodgers, like in Alvin Kamara when he was with Drew Brees. We could bank on the touchdown upside, and I think that's what you can do with Carson. I'm not saying you should spend the capital on him, because, as Johnny said, very injury prone, very violent runner. So that's a situation to look out for. Johnny, DK Metcalf, I mean, we don't have to spend too much time here. We know who he's going to be. What's next for DK's progression? Can he get to the actual top?
Yeah, wide receiver 1 is what I put when you said, Is there anything he could do to go up? I said, wide receiver 1, that's about it. Can he get there? There is some cause of concern when you're talking about what you've heard from beat reporters and, Pete Carroll coming out and saying they want to run the ball a little bit more. They didn't like how Russell Wilson turned the ball over so much when they were throwing a lot. I tend to believe that what we've seen in history, Travis, that these alpha wide receiver 1s, even if they're on a low pass volume, it doesn't matter. They're still going to at least produce. Now the wide receiver 2 for that team might struggle, and we'll talk about Tyler Lockett here in a second. But I do think that, is there a path for DK to finish as that number 1 overall wide receiver again this year? I do think so. Their schedule is a little bit difficult, like you said, but DK is a monster. He's going into his 3rd year. We've seen mega jumps from wide receivers from their 2nd year to 3rd year. And I just think
we've seen a mega jump with this guy. So I agree with you. I think that the ceiling's there and the upside there. You might as well take him. He's a guy that you can take and bank on. You're going to basically, when you take one of those guys in the 2nd to 3rd round at wide receiver, you're calling your shot. This guy, I think, is going to hit the home run. And what a better guy to call than a DK Metcalf, who's in a genetic freak matched with an elite quarterback. Talk to me about Tyler Lockett. You've called it out now for the last couple of years that he's just too inconsistent. Are you still feeling that way based on where he's going? Do you believe that there's some upside here with Tyler Lockett at all this year? Will you be drafting him?
Hey, Travis, let me ask you, do you like magic tricks?
Sure.
Are you a Magic fan? Whisper Nation. Whisper Nation, you guys like Magic? Let me know in the comments below. But
this
I'm gonna
Johnny doing a magic trick. It's a magic podcast.
Yeah, I'm gonna teach you a magic trick. It's called, you let other people draft Tyler Lockett, and when they, go up to the board all happy and excited, oh, got a steal, Tyler Lockett, and put it up there. Some people, oh no, and here's what you do: you go, I'm the Magic Man. Now you see him, now you don't, because that's exactly what Tyler Lockett is. Don't be bummed. Let somebody else take the trick, take the bait, and look at this hand while you know what you got in this hand is where the actual magic trick is happening. Guess what? There's nothing in there. That's the trick, Travis. There's nothing there, because when you look at Tyler Lockett, yes, I totally understand. People are going to, your league mates are going to be looking at their, draft kits and stuff, and they're going to be saying, oh, look at Tyler Lockett. 3 straight seasons where he finished as a wide receiver 17 or better in PPR. He finished as a wide receiver 8 last year in PPR. He's going so late in drafts. What am I missing? He's had back-to-back seasons with over 1,000 yards. This guy is such a steal. 28 touchdowns last 3 years, Travis. How can this guy not be drafted higher? 130 targets last year. I don't know what I'm talking about. Sounds a little crazy, right? Well, here's when you break it down. Let other people look at those end of season stats. Let them look at what he did last year. The big part of it is when you break it down, Tyler Lockett on a week-to-week basis, it gets bad, people. It gets nasty. Wide receiver 2 or better on 39% of his games in the last 2 years. That's less than 50%. Obviously, 39% is less than 50%. But last year, he was only a wide receiver 2 or better 31% of the time, Travis, which means he has these mega monster blowout games where he scores 4 touchdowns for you. And yes, he will probably have a couple of those games again this year, but he does this time and time again where people will draft him because he has great end of the season finishes. He'll probably finish top 15 again this year as from a wide receiver standpoint. But when you break it down, he's going to give you way more headaches. And the person who has him is not going to know when to start him or when to sit him. And their chances are they're going to miss out on that 40-point game because they're going to be like, do I sit him? Do I start him? He's had 4 points the last 4 games. What do I do? They have a bad schedule. I'm going to sit him. And then all of a sudden he goes off for the 4 and that person misses out. Don't be that person. Skip on Tyler Lockett. Laugh all the way back to your draft spot and pick somebody else.
I want to come in here. Do It 420 says he's the definition of a good best ball player. So like we said earlier with Russell and DK as a stack, Russell and Tyler Lockett, great stack as well in best ball. Make sure you're grabbing that. But yeah, I think Lockett is just too inconsistent of a player. And now such a deep wide receiver pocket of rounds 3 through 7 of guys that you can really go after. He's just not a guy who's going to ever be consistently the wide receiver 1 that you could potentially get with the upside there. I'd rather be taking guys from other teams that I could get there that could hit that ceiling. Johnny, I want to bring home the show with Gerald Everett. Okay. There's a lot of tight end mouths to feed in Seattle. There always has been, but we've seen upside with Jimmy Graham before. Then you talk about Shane Waldron is coming over as offensive coordinator, was the passing game coordinator with the Rams. So he knows Everett. He knows how to use Everett in space theoretically. And then we've seen the upside before with Jimmy Graham. Any path for Gerald Everett to be a late tight end that you target, last round pick, anything like that could actually kind of break out this year in Seattle?
I might take a couple of stabs at him. Well, maybe I shouldn't say it like that. I'll probably draft him in a couple of leagues, to be honest with you.
Don't stab Gerald Everett.
Yeah, don't stab Gerald Everett. I like him. He's a good human. At least I think so. When you look at Russell Wilson and this offense, I love that you brought up the coaching staff, Travis. That's a great point. You also look at what Russell Wilson does. I know that we always talk about the wide receivers for Russell Wilson, but he actually does target his tight end on a 20% market share basis over the last 3 seasons on average, which is pretty healthy in the league. They did lose David Moore to Carolina, which was like that 3rd wide receiver that they did feel comfortable with, or at least Russell did. Now they do still have Will Dissly, the big diesel, but he only did see 29 targets last year. Travis was only about 5% of the target market share for the tight end position. I will say that we have seen monster games from Gerald Everett before. He had 2 90-plus receiving games with the Rams. The other thing I do like, he has a 56.3 contested catch rate over the last 2 years, What does that mean? Well, I'll equate that to that just happens to be the same as DK last year. His teammate now had the same contested catch rate. So you're talking about if Russell Wilson gets, that trust, can throw it up in the red zone to a big tight end. We've seen that before. So I do think that there will be weeks, I talked about 56 or 46% of the time, these tight ends, it works every time. It comes from waiver wire tight ends, streams of the week. And I think that Everett will be on that list a couple times this year because they will target him.
All right, Johnny, that wraps it up. That means our divisional breakdown is done for this year, which means we're going to start getting into those deep dive shows, league winners, sleepers, bromances, all the things that you guys need to plant your flag in, guys, and just really try to win your league. The best way to try and win your league, though, is to follow us on all social media platforms, as we've said before, and get over to thefantasywhispers.com and get the draft kit today for only $10. So only the rest of this month is the only one you're going to be, only able to get it at that price. Then it goes up to 15. Still an industry low, but you're going to want to get your hands on the draft kit right there. For everybody who joined us, Unc Phillips, Do It 420, Jacob Blay, Cat's Pajamas, all you guys, we appreciate you so much. Thanks for following us. For Johnny Game Time Hicks, I'm Big Travy. We're the Fantasy Whisperers. We're out. Peace.
Peace.
Right here.
Oh, hey, you made it to the end of the video. If you like what you saw and you want to learn how to dominate your own draft and win your own league, head on over to thefantasywhispers.com and grab your copy of the Fantasy Whispers Draft Kit today, or click the link in the description below. And if you're still not sold, check out one of these videos.